welcome to the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast. I am Jason Mann, and today I am pleased to have the hosts of the dearly departed NBA podcast, Disciples of Clyde, Dan Filowitz and Kenneth Drews. Welcome, gentlemen.
To be here, Jason. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Jason. Really fun to be back to have the microphone in my hand. Thank you.
So we are going to talk about Linsanity. It has been 5 years since Jeremy Lin caused a fervor with the Knicks, and in 12 starts he averaged 2.25 points, 8.7 assists. The Knicks were 9-3 during that stretch, turning around the team that had struggled despite having added Carmelo Anthony recently, having Amar'e, Stoudemire, and Tyson Chandler, and being coached by miked'antoni. And this really became the central story of the NBA during that time, and really a major national news story in a way the NBA rarely is. Also, a feel-good story coming off a contentious NBA lockout. So for you guys, we're now looking at this from the lens of 5 years past. What does the Linsanity time period mean to you?
Well, for me personally, and pardon me, Dan, I'm used to interrupting Dan, so he doesn't mind, is that I loved the fact that there's so many of these guys who were good in college or were good in Europe or were street ball legends, whatever, Ray for Alston types. I like seeing everybody get their shot. And if you knew that, Jeremy Lin was on a 10-day contract, spent some of that 10 days not playing, and then sort of miked'antoni just sort of shrugged his shoulders and said, well, you're going to get released. I think it was like a day or something after it was at one of the big games. I believe it was the net game when he actually got all those minutes, or the Houston game a couple days before. But the idea that a guy like that just got a shot, and because he's really good at getting to the hole and finishing, he did some memorable, interesting stuff. And I just like that a guy like that gets on the floor in the first place and gets a chance to do whatever it is that he's good at, be it a rebounder, be it a passer, be it an enforcer, whatever it would be. So that's how I felt at the time. And it was just exciting to see him do it so well.
Yeah, I think if you're asking how I feel about it now in retrospect, I think it's just, another nice thing that the Knicks managed to ruin. The everything while it was happening, it was, there was all this it was just purely joyful and hopeful, because there was this guy that no one expected much out of him. He knew he could play if you saw him a little bit in college, and it was cool, like Ken said, to see a guy get his shot, but just the fact that he was doing it, doing so well, and it kept going, that was, it wasn't just one or two games, because, the NBA is full of, random guys having one or two games that are awesome. He kept doing it for weeks, and it just felt like it was never going to end. So in the moment, it's just I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe this is happening to us. But then it's, it all ended in basically nothing. So, I mean, not much good has happened since then. And that's what you kind of remember. We still have Carmelo Anthony and not much else.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost the exact same situation. So also what you're left with in retrospect, obviously, is, they were good the next year completely without him, and it's been nothing since. He's obviously a good player, and I think they probably would have been well off having him for the last 5 years, or having him as an asset back in 2012. But it really is. It was sort of an ephemeral, gather your rosebuds while you may, and that was it. It ended. Here we are 5 years later with gray hair.
Yeah.
So what do you remember, a first moment where you realized this is really, just a special, not, once every few years kind of, thing that really is capturing people's attention in an unusual way?
The game against the Lakers, because I think that was the best team that they had played at the time, and that he was still able to do it like that. Yeah. And that people had started to notice that he was playing this well,
with a handful of ridiculous finishes during that game too. I mean, he had 5 or 6 in that game, just reverses, spin moves, everything. I mean, it was just an exciting game, in addition to having 38 points. And I got the box score in front of me here. I mean, it was just he was great production wise, but also aesthetically in that game.
Yeah, it was, when you knew that they were going to actually try to stop him, and they couldn't, and it was again against a good team, that was Yeah, because the Lakers used to be good. Don't forget. It wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
Like that was sort of where it felt like, okay, this is something a little different than just random guy X having a couple of good games.
That what I remember too from that game is that also I think beforehand, and like I guess it was that situation where he had kind of set the league on fire, and the reporters were asking all the big players at the time, LeBron, Kobe Bryant, who at the time was super high profile still. They had asked, have you heard of this Jeremy Lin guy? And he said, well, I heard of him. Like, what's he doing? And some reporter says to him, he's averaging 28-6 after whatever, how many games it was. And Kobe's kind of like eyebrows went up. Oh, well, I do that all the time. Not a big deal to me. But then he went out and did it. And I agree. That was a memorable game. For me, it went back. I had wanted them to have him on. I knew they had him on a 10-day contract. And that because I followed these geeky things, I read the posting and toasting blog and other things like that. And I knew that from watching him in Summer League that he could get to the dish at least. And the Knicks never have a guy who could do that, and still haven't. And that, well, actually, they have Derrick Rose who stinks, but who can do that one thing. But what I noticed is, okay, get him on the floor. He can actually do something, pass to cutting teammates, whomever, and then. So he got a run against Houston, a little run against Boston, and then against the Nets he had a good game. And then when it really took fire for me was I remember it was the night before the same day as the Super Bowl was the next game, Utah, and I remember putting a joke on Twitter. I'm really excited about tomorrow. Not about the Super Bowl, and I'm a lifelong Giants fan, but about Jeremy Lin. And I actually was excited, not to thinking what would happen, but then he went out and kicked the crap out of the Utah Jazz. And that for me was like, oh, he actually jumped into the narrative and pushed it forward. And that got really exciting for me. And then that was the beginning of the week, and he kind of, by the end of the week, he was a national phenomenon.
Yeah. And it was that Jazz game, that was his first start, and Melo was injured in that game, and Amar'e was out, I believe, that because of his older brother had passed away, and he had 28 and 8 in that game, and that was the game afterward where miked'antoni said he intended to ride Lin like freaking Secretariat, so showing the confidence that D'Antoni had in him. And it's interesting because that's really the only time where the Knicks made sense in the way that we expect a Mike D'Antoni team to make sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the sad part. He only got a couple weeks of whatever it was he wanted to do, and not that it would have lasted at that degree if he didn't get hurt. But the sad thing is he never really got a point guard who could get around people and hit cutters, hit people on the pick and roll. And if you recall then, like Tyson Chandler was having a ball, was getting a lot of dunks and lobs. Jared Jeffries at the time, they added J.R. Smith sort of halfway into Linsanity. So it's a shame that that's all D'Antoni got for all the years he was there, and shepherding them from the end of the Stephon Marbury era through the failed free agency time, through that first year with Amar'e when things were kind of fun and didn't look on Gallinari and Wilson Chandler, and then they traded everyone for Melo. Really, we got like 2 months of that team playing like D'Antoni wanted to play, and then 2 years later we had 7-8 games of Mike D'Antoni coaching Lin. So it's a little sad, especially when you see what he's doing with actual players now. Whenever he's had actual players who can run his system, they're pretty prolific and fun.
Yeah, and it's kind of the culmination of, as you talked about, this really kind of the first time that the Knicks actually embraced a tear down and rebuild. I mean, it was for it was primarily for free agency. It wasn't really building through young players, although, Landry Fields had a nice rookie season. Iman Shumpert was a rookie this year, and it was showing some signs of spunk and some pretty good defense there. As you mentioned, the point guard situation was not great. They had Tony Douglas, who did not fit Mike D'Antoni's system at all, Mike Bibby, who was ancient, and Baron Davis, who was old and injured. So there was definitely a gap to fill, but you could see, the promise of the team as they were developing under D'Antoni. You mentioned that one year with Amar'e, the first year he came and was their big free agent acquisition, and became kind of a cult favorite because he was the guy who chose to go there. But at this point was starting to show the signs of the injuries that would eventually reduce his effectiveness. Carmelo was the big star on the team, but they had, as you talked about, gutted the team. A fun team with Gallinari and Chandler and those guys. So it's sort of a weird combination where there's quite a bit of talent there. There's Tyson Chandler, who was the center from the champion Mavs, would be the defensive player of the year. So they did have that mix, but it was definitely the point guard was the biggest hole on the team. And then obviously he fit that really well.
We had been doing the podcast. We met in Chicago. Everything we did as Knicks fans about the Disciples of Clyde podcast was all done in Chicago, and but obviously plugged into within the days of the internet, it almost feels like it doesn't matter. But yeah, it was for me watching the beginning of that. It was the word Linsanity bugged me because as much as I liked him. And obviously, I like good things happening to the Knicks. I liked Jeremy Lin. I didn't like Linsanity. I'm like, cool, he's a really fun player. He's interesting. He gets others involved. He's exciting. Let's stop talking. I don't care that he's Asian. I don't care that he went to Harvard. I'm like, he's good. Let's watch him and enjoy this. And let's hopefully build something. And let's run more. Let's pick up the pace. So I'm probably not alone that a lot of lifelong basketball fans, not just spectacle fans, probably weren't as high on quote unquote Linsanity as they were on Jeremy Lin the person.
Yeah, but I think
the human story.
You brought up something that you can't discount about why this became something more than just a normal sports story. That it was an Asian athlete doing it, which is just added an element of unusualness and novelty to it. I mean,
well, I live in Massachusetts, Dan, where we're very liberal and post-racial. So,
yeah, not Seattle though.
Yes.
But yeah, it's total conservative.
There's actually someone playing a banjo behind Dan right now.
Well, I'm in Columbus, Ohio, so that might actually be true, but.
But still, I mean, I think that added to. I mean, the whole thing was this like ongoing feeling of just can't believe this is really happening, and in a good way, like in a really positive, like joyful way, because
he was like living on Landry Field's couch because he was on a 10-day contract and didn't want to spend his per diem on a hotel, so he was living on Landry Field's couch. Like it was just such a fun thing. He was 22 years old doing all that, or 3, whatever he was.
Yeah, and you'd like to hope that more of it, like. More of like my interest is piqued because this does not meet my normal expectations that there's an Asian guy tearing up the NBA, and not the negative side of that, which is like assuming stereotypes and some of the other things that you'd hope wasn't the majority of people who found the story interesting. I mean I tend to agree with you, Ken, about why I enjoyed it was more from I like seeing this guy play basketball, and we all knew that he wasn't going to be putting up 28-6, like this was a strange run, but you could kind of see like, hey, this guy can play, this guy can do some things. What if we had an interesting point guard to pair up with Chandler and Carmelo and Amar'e and actually like have ourselves a team. That would be fun. He doesn't have to put 20. He doesn't have to do 28-6. How about 12-8? That'd be great. Like we don't even have that. So
yeah, right.
And somebody who's like looking to get other people involved and can get to the basket and create that disruption that can push the pace the way that D'Antoni would want. Like we all wanted that promise to be true, even though if we were being honest with ourselves, we knew that wasn't going to totally work with Carmelo. I mean, he plays a certain way.
Not that he should. I mean, he's so skilled, and I've come to realize this. I'm not entirely happy with how the Carmelo Anthony era has gone. How could you? One good season, basically. But he's so skilled, he could play any style. If you stuck him on Houston right now with other good players and everything, he would fit in if you stuck him on any of the good teams, Cleveland, LA Clippers that they talked about theoretically. He can shoot, he can pass, he can rebound, he can defend enough as a combo forward. He could do anything, and that's a little disappointing. That we got a good point guard who can run. Let's run. Come on.
Yeah, but he didn't want to. I mean, I think that's
didn't want to. He should. He'd be a much better player.
There's a lot of stuff like Olympic Carmelo Anthony plays different than NBA Carmelo Anthony. So he's got like the ability to do different stuff. But when it came down
he's
to
a great basketball player, he could do much more than he's actually doing, and he knows better than stopping the ball.
That's what's disappointing.
Jump in any time here, Jason. Dan and I will do this all day.
That's all right.
That's true.
No, what's interesting is about this, and I definitely agree with what you're saying, but the Melo reputation at the time, it was, a little bit cast as a villain for, once Lin left, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but why not? That he, called it like crazy or ridiculous, I think was the word he used. And it was definitely clear that, he didn't seem to particularly like playing that much with Lin, and maybe some resentment over the fact that he was, getting all this attention or whatever. And looking at how, Melo's reputation now 5 years later as basically the victim of all this Knicks ineptitude, and basically the front office trying to get him to go, and him battling back, and also his recent prominent embrace of social activism has kind of changed at least the perception of him as a person, maybe not so much as a player. But it's interesting how 5 years later, I think a lot of us think differently about Carmelo Anthony than maybe we did at the time.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't do himself any favors at the time by kind of giving him, basically, pouting a little bit that somebody else was getting attention like that.
Do we actually know that he did that? I mean,
yeah, that happened. I mean, there was body language, there was all kinds of the stuff he said. The statements were kind of had some passive aggressiveness to it. I remember all that.
Well, I mean, if you imagine yourself as him, and I'm going to defend him for a second. And then Dan, you can make your point, off the show later. Whatever you were going to say that I interrupted. I'm kidding. I would say that it's kind of annoying. Say you're in this media scrum, getting assaulted by all these reporters asking you the exact same question. What do you think of Jeremy Lin? You answer it. Another guy, what do you think of Jeremy Lin? And you answer it. And then, hey, this Jeremy Lin guy, what do you think? It's like, I don't know that he actually was jealous. I mean, he was making 150,000 times more money than Jeremy Lin was. He was on a long-term contract. Jeremy Lin was still on 10-day contracts. I don't know that he was actually the villain here. I know stylistically he likes to hold the ball more, and Jeremy Lin was a guy who liked to play off the pick and roll and create. I've never been convinced that just wasn't a media narrative. I've never seen the exact quote or him saying, maybe he did a little side eye at the situation. And later on, when Jeremy got that offer sheet from Houston, Carmelo made a little comment. I don't know that he was the villain here, behind the scenes or otherwise.
Well, I mean, villain's probably too strong. I mean, but I don't think that he did himself any favors. So, which he's had problems with his whole career. And
D'Antoni did quit. As I was making my little speech there, I remember D'Antoni did quit once Melo came back. So something happened. So it's he's got a reputation for being a bit of a diva, I guess, and it's. Some of it's probably unfair. Some of it's probably fair. I mean, the thing is, it's interesting that Jason says that narrative of is Carmelo the victim of Knicks ineptitude? Yes. Does Carmelo create his own problems sometimes also? Yeah. Yes. That's, they could have had better outcomes over the years if he ever, really altered his style to which he kind of did last year, for stretches playing with Porzingis. He was, had more assists than he's had, I think ever. He's a terrific. I mean, every aspect of basketball. Yeah, obviously he's not a lockdown defender, but every other aspect of the game, he's really terrific at. And in a pinch, could do every part that's needed in a given situation. That's what's a little disappointing.
It's also that he wants to carry himself like a LeBron or a Wade, like his draft class, except that LeBron James teams and Dwayne Wade teams, even when Dwayne Wade was fully himself, don't miss the playoffs. And Carmelo teams did a lot. Mm-hmm. And that's has to do with style, has to do with, willingness to play, a certain way. And so Carmelo wanted all wanted the adulation and wanted to be treated like the one guy that was going to make the difference to winning, and he never has been, unfortunately. And there's a myriad of reasons for that. Some of which is his own instinct to he'll play any style, but when it comes down to it, he wants the ball in his hand. He wants isolation. Like if it's pressure, if it's crunch time, if it's a big opponent, everything's going back. Like that's what he wants, and that's what happens. And then he, in those same situations, defends sporadically, rebounds sporadically, and then you end up with a guy who scores a relatively inefficient 25 points with not enough rebounds and not enough assists, and that's Carmelo.
And that's why I drink.
Yeah.
So going back to how Lin handled the situation, I think is interesting to me. Reading back some of the articles and some of the stuff that's been written both at the time and then later on, it's hard to imagine how much of a challenge it must have been for him to emerge at this level of sensation just as he's trying to figure out how to play in the NBA. Because, as you mentioned, he doesn't have a whole lot of NBA experience. He played a little bit previously with the Warriors, the previous 2 seasons, I believe, and he had spent a little bit of time in the D League and had a couple of games with the Knicks. But he had very little time in the NBA itself, and I mean, imagine the spotlight that you're getting. You're not only are you the biggest story in the in the biggest market. You're on the I remember seeing him just on the regular morning news, the national morning news of what's going on at the peak of this. And imagine trying to figure out the NBA while you handle that. I mean, it's amazing that he really did as well as he did, and he really came through that, I think, in an admirable way.
Well,
yeah.
Go on, Dad, please.
I was going to agree with you. I think that was another, especially during that 2-week stretch when it was all going on. There was, he had this funny story about living on a teammate's couch and kind of this like rags to riches kind of thing, and he seemed to handle it he was relatively humble about it, relatively self-aware about it, which was endearing. So, and it didn't seem to get to he didn't I don't think he carried himself over the next few seasons like more of a big shot or something like that than was warranted. I think he had some bad luck with injuries and whatnot. It was probably more of his problem. But yeah, I think that was another cool part of the story. It was just this guy. Yeah, this guy was was endearing about it.
He was much closer to a normal. Obviously, he had an Ivy League education and came from a decently well-off family, but he really was more like the average 22-year-old trying to find himself, trying to figure out what he's doing, sleeping on buddies' couches and sleeping on his brother's couch, and everyone else had come up through this star system that he just wasn't privy to. And there's actually a really good movie I saw on Netflix. You could probably see it a bunch of other places, called Linsanity, that was made by this filmmaker who had been following and interviewing him for years when he was at Harvard and after. And there's actually cameras rolling when he's on his 10-day contract, leaving, getting cut from Golden State, getting cut from Houston. They're asking, what's going on? Are you worried that you're going to have a career? And he was genuinely facing this precipice. Is he going to ever have his NBA career? Is he going to probably... I'm guessing in his mind, he knew he could go to China at any time and have a real career and make a living. But he obviously didn't want to do that. He wanted to get this NBA dream and just never got the chance because he was undrafted and other things. He was on a team that had Stephen Curry in it and other stuff like that. So he really was just a guy who was really trying to find himself. I was always very impressed. He handled it with a lot of humility. He was religious, so he felt the need to. I believe he was a born-again Christian, but whatever. He's a very religious, whatever it is. I don't want to label things that I can't quite remember. But I thought he felt the need to push that and always mention that. And I thought came across as a great guy, and he's given no indication in the years since, with all the money and the fame and adversity, that he's anything other than a great guy. So I think that was part of it. He was just such a humble, likable kid, and you were happy for him as a human being. So if you do really check out that movie Linsanity from 2013, though, it really shows a lot of inside access. You really get a sense of what he was feeling at the time because they were filming.
going through a little bit of the key points of insanity, even though, yeah, I agree with the insanity term is a little bit, it's not my favorite term either, but.
Well, he obviously embraced it. He trademarked it and everything else.
Although although after he later was kind of said, I don't really like that term as much either. He kind of didn't, even though he did trademark at the time, he sort of backed off
it's smart.
a little bit.
You don't want other people making money. It's your name, if anyone's going to make money off it, you better. So
Absolutely.
It was smart.
Yeah. So he was named Eastern Conference Player of the Week in his first week after that we talked about with the Nets and the Jazz and a couple other great performances in that 38-point performance versus the Lakers. Then on a Valentine's Day 2012, he had a game-winning 3 against the Raptors, which was maybe one of the peak moments as well of his run. He at that point was the first NBA player to have at least 20 points and 7 assists in each of his first 5 starts, and also I believe had the most points in his first 5 starts since Allen Iverson. Also had the most turnovers in NBA history in his first 7 starts, dating back to 78. That was maybe the one issue that he or one of the issues that he had even during that time. And then the streak ends with right before the All-Star break with the loss to the New Orleans Hornets. They were still the Hornets then. But he still has some strong performances against the Mavs during that time, 28-14 with 5 steals. And then Carmelo Anthony returns on February 20th, and 3 days later is the infamous Heat game where Lin goes 1 for 11 and 8 turnovers, and the Heat absolutely at the basically the peak of their powers as they're going to win the championship that year. Absolutely hound him, and it's sort of the first real bad game that he has kind of during that stretch.
Yeah, and that Heat game was, look, I mean, the turnovers, I remember this at the time too. Like, you knew that this was not going to last. You knew that this wasn't the heralding of, I don't know, the next perfectly great player. It was just, you knew eventually he was going to come back to earth a little bit. The Heat game, just I think it, like, you knew he was going to come back to earth, and you just didn't expect it to be like that hard, like that of the fall, like, because that game was brutal, and it that made you really question, like, okay, is this actually somebody that can sustain this league if when the pressure's on like that, he just can't do anything, so like that was like, I think it it went past just like, okay, well, we know he's not going to do 28 and 6, but now you're like, geez, can he do anything? Because like, look, the old adage about like why the guy you see at the, at the park or at the gym, the YMCA or whatever, that's really, really good at basketball, couldn't even get their shot off in the NBA. Like that, yeah. Like that's the difference, right? And now you have this guy that, like, he was doing all these amazing things, and now it's like, oh, now he can't even get a shot off. Like, is he?
Well, that was one game. I mean,
yeah, I know. So
and then he got hurt. That's the problem. Like a week or so late. I'm sure Jason has the exact timeline, but he didn't get a chance to play in the playoffs. He didn't get a chance to kind of keep going, and he did have some good games after that. It wasn't just like, okay, they got some tape on him and now it was over. He did have some good games after that. People did have tape on him, and they started not letting him go right-handed as much as he would like to, and other things like that. But I think that I said before, like, I'm always skeptical. No, you know the word I'm speaking of. No, I never like to assume that the narrative, the zeitgeist that the media is talking about, is actually what's going on, and because who knows, but like, if you just look at it in logical terms, you had the team that had lost the finals was about to win the first of 2 titles. Its particular strength was 2-6, was 2 of the best perimeter defenders on the planet at the time, who were good at trapping guards and disrupting what they're going to do, with a very good coach. And so that happened. Does that have to be some watershed moment? It was a tough night. I mean, that, like I said, I look with side eye at these media narratives a lot of the time. It was a tough night for a rookie.
Yeah, and that's fair. And that's
like,
fair.
Full stop.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's fair. If you're thinking about like what you were feeling in the moment, like that.
Oh, it was certainly deflating.
Like, that was a pain in the balloon, right? So like, and we always tried this when we were doing the show. Was like, okay, let's try to get past some of the the media narrative. Let's get into what's actually happening here. Let's get past the emotion and think about this stuff logically. And logically, yes, having a bad night against LeBron James and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh is not the worst thing that can ever happen to somebody in the NBA. That's going to happen. They're really good. So yeah. And then the issue was just that even the good games after that, the turnovers were starting to become a problem, and they were starting to figure them out a little bit. And that so the turnovers that you were starting to see more of even during the good stretch, now you're seeing all right, there's more issues here than we were hoping for.
It probably became clear then that, okay, what his destiny isn't going to be a first-team All-NBA guy. It's probably going to be a very good role player, which is nothing to sneeze at, especially when you're coming from almost nowhere like he was. But I think even by the end of the year, it wasn't that, which is why obviously the Knicks didn't match that offer he got from Houston, is we're not sure he's going to be an All-NBA guy, even though it appears, it was – once he was in, I don't think any reasonable basketball fans were thinking he stinks. He's going to be playing in Europe next year. I think it was pretty clear to everyone he was good. It was just a matter of how good. And towards the end of that run, even before he got hurt, obviously there was some coaching turmoil there because you switched coaches right in the middle of this run to Mike Woodson. I guess his destiny was probably more clear, which is what it actually has turned into, which is he's a pretty good player to have on your team. If you need some points, he's going to get them for you. He probably can't be the guy, for a lot of reasons, for his physicality, for his defense, other things. He can be shut down with some scheme sometimes. But so at that, it was obviously if you want to say it was that Heat game, or the injury, or the fact that he was just gone the next year, something pricked that balloon, of course.
Yeah, and I think, from a logical basketball standpoint, I don't think anybody was upset from that standpoint that the Knicks didn't match that offer. It would have been crazy to overpay a guy that was just going to ultimately be a decent player to have in your team.
I obviously agree. The fact that it was a $25 million total contract, which is obviously, it's not a lot of money for Dan, but it's a lot of money for me. And the idea is that, think about that. I say bad NBA contracts are, 6 years, $150 million. I'm not so sure DeMar DeRozan isn't on a bad contract. The Kings traded DeMarcus Cousins because they don't want him to have a $200 million contract. $25 million over 3 years, even if the math said 1 year was a balloon payment of $15 million, in the NBA, even in 2012, is not a big deal. That's why I was upset about it. He's young. He's something. He's valuable. I'd rather have him than Raymond Felton. So
and that was going to be my other side argument, which is also how come we can't keep nice things that was just sort of we had so little to feel good about for the last 16 years. The few times that we did, it never seemed to last, and this was just another thing where it's we had something that was organic and that was somewhat pure, and it got taken away, and
it went away. Did it get taken away? It went away.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure. Yeah.
So let's assume for a moment that they did keep him and that he was roughly the player that he's been for the past 5 years. Could he have stayed in New York under the shadow of that Linsanity phenomenon? Do you think that would have worked, or would that have just been kind of a reminder of disappointment? That he would never be that that level of player again.
Well, he wouldn't have been enough. I mean, even for that team the next year that was really good, they certainly didn't need a guy who dominated the ball. They were really good for the opposite reason, that they didn't give it to somebody to dominate the ball. And so I'm sure it probably wouldn't have worked long term. But if you're just looking at sort of asset collection and stuff like that, I think it still would have been smarter. But it probably wouldn't have worked. He would have worked, but I'm not sure the situation, because it would have gone downhill eventually, and he would have just been cap fodder. Maybe, who knows?
It would have depended on how he played. I think they could have they could have been okay with it if the team was winning and he was playing pretty well, with an occasional throwback 28-6 game thrown in there, because that probably could have happened. it's not out of the realm of possibility. I don't know for sure if those pieces all work together. But let's say they had they could have been a decent team. Probably not good enough to beat the Heat in that era, but let's say they were winning more than they were losing, and he was playing well, and had some occasional good games. It totally could have worked. It just would have been like where it wouldn't have worked is if they were still losing, and more often than not he was putting up poor performances and not getting along well with Carmelo Anthony and feuding because they both want to dominate the ball. Like that's where it wouldn't have worked. But winning cures a lot, and if they were winning, anything could have worked.
Yeah. I'm not sure they would have. That's the
I'm not sure that either. But it wasn't impossible to think that with the talent that they had, that they could have maybe figured something out.
That's right. I mean, I just think in New York those expectations would have been high. I mean, they were high anyway when he went to Houston.
He got cut off at the knees there because they got James Harden, who does everything he does, only much, much better.
Sure. And going to LA wasn't a great situation for him either, with Kobe there. So that was kind of a bad mix. It's funny that D'Antoni, went to the Lakers and the Rockets in opposite, and then just they both missed each other. Like they both kind of it felt like they were destined to reunite at some point. Maybe they still will at some point, but they were both on the same teams, but just barely missed each other in those stops. So it's funny how that sort of thing works.
Yeah,
so like when Houston flames out of the playoffs this year, and D'Antoni's coaching the Nets next year.
Yeah, there you go. So, as you guys alluded to, right after that Miami loss, they did have one win against Cleveland, but then they have a 6-game losing streak, and then D'Antoni resigns from the team, and Mike Woodson becomes the coach. And I'd forgotten about this, but apparently early on in the season, when the Knicks were struggling before Lin came along, there were actually "We Want Woodson" chants from some of the fans wanting to fire Mike D'Antoni in front of Mike Woodson. Speaking of reputations that have changed drastically in 5 years, Mike D'Antoni certainly has been restored during that time, and Mike Woodson's not quite as much.
It goes to show you don't know anything, do you? I mean, like about whatever the narrative. I'm against narratives tonight, I guess. But the fans will be chanting for this thing one day. They'll be chanting for the rookie to come in. Once he becomes a guy who's in the rotation, they hate him. In football, they always love the backup quarterback. It's just like the mob knows nothing. I think that's what we maybe have learned here. The mob is dumb.
Yes.
Because it's funny, the year that Woodson had a really good, had the best year with the Knicks was he was forced to play a style that he doesn't like because of injuries, and it worked. And then
they blew it up.
And then
when they had the chance.
And then he didn't go back to it. Somehow he determined that he didn't learn from it, which is that part it's always baffling. When someone can't see the thing that literally everybody else can see. Mm-hmm. And it's publicly everyone is hey, you're winning because of this, and he's no, I'm not. How's that possible?
Everyone knows Carmelo, play Carmelo power forward, stretch 4, have an athletic rim running center. Let's go. Have a bunch of other people that move the ball and hit shots. Let's go do this. That's how you do it. And nope, no, let's not do that. Let's do other things.
It's almost like people have trouble accepting facts that go against their preconceived notions.
I think we've broken that story. I think.
Yes.
Call the psychology journals. I think we've broken the story of the human condition.
So there's as we talked about after Woodson comes in, Lin still plays, but his playing time is reduced a little bit. He still has some good games during that stretch, and then deals with the knee injury that puts him out for the season. He's unable to come back for the playoffs, and then the team chooses not to bring him back, and we've kind of gotten to our feelings about that. But Yeah, I remember an interesting Tyson Chandler quote, and I think it may have been the next season, and I couldn't quite find it, but it had something to the effect of that, it was a really fun run, with Jeremy Lin, but there was something about it that didn't feel lasting to him. Like it was something where, it felt fleeting, like it felt like it was just, almost too good to be true. And I wonder, I would probably trust the instincts of a player to know that better than me as an observer to understand that. But I wonder what the difference between that is versus the, Mike Woodson, not wanting to go against his preconceived notions and, playing big in the playoffs instead of going with what works. Like that's a really fine line for me that I find, like an interesting idea.
Yeah, it's interesting to have and I kind of remember what you were saying too, like that there was a Tyson Chandler saying that. Yeah, like I wonder what the players were thinking at the time. Like, I mean, they might have saw him a little bit in practice, but they probably didn't see that much of him. So they almost seemed as surprised at the Linsanity run as everybody else. And then look, you go back in retrospect. Like I think if he was thinking about it as like, okay, well, that was a fun little thing that happened. You can. Maybe it was in his head that it felt fleeting, or maybe like that's how he chooses to remember it, as opposed to like that's how he actually felt at the time. So that's only part of that where I'm like, I don't know if his observation is any different than anybody else's. I mean, everyone has a tendency to like look in the past with differently than they were actually feeling about it at the time.
I'm curious. I mean, they had a good offseason that year. I mean, obviously they let him go, but they added a bunch of role players. They signed Jason Kidd. They brought in Rasheed Wallace. They had J.R. Smith. They brought back. They put together and they got Raymond Felton, which was an adequate move. I mean, they had a good offseason, and then they went on and had a very good, entertaining season, the best in years. So it obviously would have been easiest to just dismiss. There was no one sitting around lamenting, why don't we have Jeremy Lin? If they had stunk that next year, obviously it would have been Jeremy Lin all the time. Other than that, it was just a footnote because they won 54 games. They were fun to watch. They fired the ball deep constantly. And, they were filled with interesting veterans that had a lot of personality.
So I want to talk a little bit about Disciples of Clyde, but if there's anything else that you guys would like to talk about regarding Linsanity before we do that, any final thoughts on that subject?
Well, I do remember, actually, we were talking about, I think it was Carmelo's first game back. He bowed on the court to Jeremy Lin. I don't know if anyone remembers this. And did it once. I didn't even see it mentioned. I'm assuming behind the scenes because of all this stuff, obviously there were jokes on Twitter about being Asian and everything. So I did want to point out that I did remember that. Like Jeremy Lin made a good play and Carmelo bowed to him, which I don't even think is a Chinese thing. So there was that. I'm not sure what it's apropos of, but at least Carmelo didn't keep doing it. But I did remember it did happen once. So someone has to back me up on this.
Okay.
Out there on Twitter.
I'm sure one of our listeners will, if you're wrong, I'm sure it'll get brought up for sure. But
right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ken's memory is racist. That's all.
It is. Ken's not, but his memory is very
That's
racist.
right.
Yes. Yes.
I'm post-racial. My memory is not.
Fair enough. So, as I mentioned, I was a huge fan of Disciples of Clyde podcast. It got me through a lot of long commutes back in the day. I used to actually, before I had an iPod or anything, I used to burn it onto CDs and listen to the CDs on the way to work and back. So,
God, we're old.
Well, I was a late adopter, I think, to that, so it may not be quite that impressive. But so like, what do you guys remember about starting the podcast? What was kind of your goal in doing it, and anything you want to mention? Any experiences you want to talk about of doing Disciples of Clyde?
I think so. I mean, Ken and I met doing doing sketch comedy stuff in Chicago, and found that we liked working together. And we had, at that point, when we had started the podcast, I think we had done at least one play together, right, Ken?
No, the situation was we were now I remember. It was the beginning of the 2007-8 season.
Yeah, so we had done one show and I mean, possibly two. And so anyway, so it was and we were actually big fans of the Basketball Jones, who were doing their podcast at the time. Now the Starters on TV, and we just like, well, I almost remember it being like, well, why don't we do something like that? There's not that much of it. Why don't we just do it?
And we would spend a lot of time when we were supposed to, because we were in sketch comedy shows, and then we wrote 2 plays by ourselves, and we would invariably put the TV on, start watching. Dan had a satellite dish or good cable package. We used to hang out at his place and record, and you talk, and we were writing. We'd invariably talk about basketball, and so at some point it's just like, yeah, what the hell? It's not like everyone back then had a podcast. So the starters now, the Basketball Jones, they were doing where they would wake up at 4 in the morning every night. By the way, some guys who deserve every bit of success they've gotten. They were waking.
Absolutely.
They had like normal people day jobs, and they were waking up at dawn to go record every day and break down every game without having any rights or anything to play on the show. So, so we did a different show, which was just conversation, goofing off, cracking jokes at each other, memory. My idea of art is, and not that the podcast is art, but is that at the time it's not, I don't need to know everything about the sport. I need to know how it made me feel and how it made Dan feel, how it made the listeners feel, and portray something. And I think that's any art. I was trying to explain art to my children, staring at a painting. Oh, it's pretty. Well, how does it make you feel? And so if I'm talking about the 90s Knicks, which we used to do all the time, or if I'm talking about some big thing Michael Jordan did or whatever, it's how it made me feel. And that's how we started talking. We were just talking, what do we find funny? What do we find interesting? And it was quite by accident. I mean, no one was listening for most of that year, I would say. We got like one fan, I don't know who the hell was listening. We did 30, 40 episodes before anyone started listening. And so, but it was all just about entertaining ourselves, making each other laugh. And this is before anyone had thought everyone was doing that. And so we were kind of inventing for ourselves, not that anyone copied it, but we were inventing a format for ourselves on the fly.
Yeah. In terms of like what kind of blew up our listener, which was a great opportunity for us, was it was when the first Free Darko book came out, and we did a review of it on the show. And we didn't know them at the time. Like I was a fan of theirs, but I didn't know any of them. And we got the book, we read it, we did a review, and we said, liked some things, didn't like some things, like, did a normal thing that we would do. And they heard that and they liked it. And they basically said, like, hey, we were thinking about doing a podcast. Why don't we just partner up and do it with you? And we said, that sounds great. Why not? And so
all of a sudden we had listeners. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot more, because they were very popular, deservedly so. And so I still find it amazing that people like listened to it and liked it. I mean, we put effort into it, so like we wanted it to be good, and we were trying to make it entertaining for someone else to listen to. But but to Ken's point, like, we weren't exactly like carefully scripting every single thing. A lot of it was just, okay, we're going to talk about these few things. Let's just have fun with it and do it. So like the fact that there's people who like yourself who burned it on a CD, like I'm blown away by that still.
Thank you, by the way. Yeah, I mean,
yes.
Seriously, like it was. I mean, Dan and I aren't working in. We're not media people. Each of us have private sector, quote unquote, jobs. We have secular jobs, I guess, for sports fans, and it was all for fun. That's all it ended up being. And we had fun every time. It was, Dan's my friend. We talked about basketball. We made fun of each other. Move on.
Yeah. I mean, the only reason we had to stop really was, we just got families and things that just got in the way of being able to put as recording a podcast, it takes some effort to actually record it and edit it and get it going and put it live, and just the time, the free time available, because we had other jobs and things like that, and families, is like it just became more of a time burden than we could handle.
Plus, we weren't watching the sport. I mean, that's also
not as much. Yeah.
So we did it and even in our heyday when we didn't watch as much as I've never understood. Obviously, we know a lot of people are trying to make a career of like the Basketball Jones was back in the day. People trying to make a career of this. If that's not your career, I'm not sure you should be watching every game. You don't have to know about every player. And like we did. Even when we were
wa-
really into it, we didn't.
Yeah, I watched a lot. I mean, I did have League Pass for a long time.
Dan was single at the time, and so he would come home from a night of drinking and watch West Coast basketball. I right around the time I met Dan, I met my wife a few months later, and so my life was different. I was never one to sit and know everything. I liked the Knicks, and I would read all the articles. And as years went by, this was the years when the basketball internet really exploded. Not around us, but we were part of that, I guess. And all of a sudden, you'd say anything, and 15 people would email you and be on Twitter. No, you were wrong. Here's the advanced stats. Here's this and that. And it's like, okay, sorry, I missed that one freaking thing. I was off having sex with my wife or whatever I was doing. Oh crap, she just saw me say that. But it's like, I was doing something to try to. She's looking at me. I was trying to get a reaction out of her.
Yeah, I will tell you what.
Speaking of side eye, but yeah.
Since I moved to the West Coast, that my wife and my kids go to bed relatively early. I could watch the same West Coast basketball games at like 8, 9 o'clock because I'm awake, but they're not on at 8, 9 o'clock here. They're already done because I live in the West Coast. Like living in Chicago, that was great. Like the West Coast games came on around 8, 9 o'clock. So I watched a ton of those, and I can't do it anymore. That's kind of a bummer, I think.
Nor should you.
For me.
I mean,
Well, I like to, and
I get that occasionally.
I don't get
not all the time. That was always my point. It's like I'm not going to apologize for not having seen everything. And if we were going to do a show, though, if we were going to actually be recording if it was our job, of course, yeah.
Or even just if we were going to keep doing that show, I wouldn't have felt responsible doing it if we both of us weren't really watching basketball anymore. Then it becomes why are we wasting people's time?
That was part of I think why we didn't we kind of pittered out because we ran out of things to say and we simply weren't watching enough and there wasn't enough there to drive the show, which is why we kind of had theoretical plans to talk about current events, other things, and maybe that'll still happen. But we had a time and then it ended, and I'm glad people enjoyed it. I still enjoyed it too. I mean, I still interact with these people on Twitter that listened to us almost 10 years ago, and it's really, and Jason, you're doing this awesome show, and that it was right up my alley. And I started listening to you a few months ago, and that it's like, you know who we are? Great, that's so great. We're all of a sudden we already know all these things about each other, and so it was just it's a nice thing, and I'm glad. I have a nice memory about it, like getting my microphone out and doing this again. It's fun. I feel very at home right.
Absolutely. I mean, I had a blast doing that show. I got to interview we had to interview some cool people through it. Other people in the basketball internet and other media figure type people, and it was again for a couple of guys that had no training background in it, and just to kind of the only thing that Ken and I were ever particularly good at was as partners saying, like tons of people sit around and say, we're going to do something and we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And they never do. We did. And that was how the podcast was born and kept going. And but just because a couple of guys had a little bit of motivation to have it be like what it was. It was awesome.
I'm thrilled that I did it. Yeah, that's the thing. We get an email from you, Jason. It's like, I used to listen to you 5 years ago, and now you're doing your own thing that's completely different, but somehow the same. It's like, that's awesome. It's just nice. We did it for ourselves, but it's nice to be remembered, at least by 4 or 5 people. And that's
yes.
Well, there was excitement from more people than that. When I saw we mentioned that we were going to have you guys on, and there's some people who are really excited about it. So I think there may be more than that out there. Although with the with the amount of time that it's been, the 5 years is a long time or so. So
everyone in the world start clapping in unison, and we'll violin music will play, and Dan and I will come out of our homes. And
there you go. Like we said, reputations change a lot in 5 years, so we'll see how the response is to this. But it's been a real treat for me to have you guys here, and like I said, the way you guys approach your podcast is there's a lot of lessons that I took internalized in that, and have tried to make the conversations smart and thoughtful but entertaining, and avoiding too much of the narratives, acknowledging them but trying to go beyond them a bit. So I appreciate that, and I definitely appreciate you both being on the show.
Well, thank you, Jason. You know, I say why your show works, why I find it entertaining, and I'm trying to work. And one of the things I listen to podcasts at work, and I listen to what yours is one of the shows. Be yourself. What are you interested in? That's true for everybody. You know, we follow the person, not the thing they're saying necessarily. You know, because if for a character or a human being that you're following over episode of a show or a blog or whatever it is, you know, so or even on Twitter, just be yourself and have fun, and then you don't have anything to apologize for. And I really do like your show. So thank you for thinking of us in a nice way.
Yeah, I've had a lot of fun. So thank you for having us on. Really, really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed the show, and you can find us at the Step Back at fansided.com. You can also leave a review or a rating for us on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen to your podcast. And you can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Over and Back NBA. So thanks again for listening, and we're back again soon.